And now we're going to turn to one of the biggest questions coming from critics of President Trump, asking why Republicans, and particularly evangelical Christians, seem to go to extremes to talk up his presidency and his accomplishments. We saw that very clearly on Sunday when now former Energy Secretary Rick Perry said Trump's election is part of God's plan.
God's used imperfect people all through history. King David wasn't perfect. Saul wasn't perfect. And I said, Mr. President, I know there are people that say, you know, you said you were the chosen one. And I said, you were.
Joining me now, Princeton University professor Eddie Glaude, Bret Stephens, and Evan McMullin back with me. Evan, you actually called this a perversion of Christianity. Why?
Well, basically, the Stephen Miller branch of the Republican Party, Trump's strongest loyalists within the party, believe that they can't win democratically anymore. They see the country as changing demographically, and they're only able and even interested in winning the votes of people who look like me. Again, speaking of the Stephen Miller branch of the Republican Party, which is obviously quite strong right now. And they've just decided that they can't win with democracy anymore, so they're supporting an anti-democratic leader and an anti-freedom leader, which is the President of the United States, President Trump. And so, you know, there could be nothing more immoral, in my view, than an attack on the innate liberty of humankind. And they've got to find some way to morally justify that. And so they use this perversion of Christianity, a common, I'll add, perversion of Christianity that suggests that human beings have no free will and that all that happens is a decision, are decisions made by God. And so when we do things or when things happen that aren't good, that are immoral, that's God's doing as well, and we have no responsibility for that. And that's what they're doing. They're clearing themselves of the deeply immoral decision to support President Trump and his abuses of our liberty, and this is the way they're doing it. Eddie, the chosen one, what do you think?
Well, it's nonsense, but it makes sense. Let me say what I mean by that. Well, look, this is dangerous insofar as whenever you try to yoke a politics to God talk, you're trying to sacralize that politics.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to tell us that again in English.
Whenever you try to yoke politics to God talk, you're trying to insulate that politics from a certain kind of criticism because you're taking it out of human doing and saying God sanctions what you're doing. And so it's always a danger, whether you're Donald Trump or whether you're Martin Luther King Jr., right, to invoke God as the justification for one's political interventions, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that it's not unusual. There's something that we use, because, you know, I'm a scholar of religion, even though I talk about politics all the time. It's something called Constantinian Christianity. There's a way in which Christianity was yoked to Constantine, was yoked to the throne, and became a way to justify power. Right? So there are ways in which you can talk about white evangelicals and their Faustian bargain, ironic, Faustian bargain to support Donald Trump because of his judges and da-da-da-da. But we understand that this is not unusual when we see certain religious communities sitting cozy with power, trying to walk the corridors of power, and in some ways compromise their basic fundamental commitments. So it's not unusual, but it's dangerous, it seems to me.
Bret, we should be clear that Rick Perry has said this about other electeds. He said that these elections are guided by a divine plan. He said that about President Obama. But in this case, more and more Republicans are really falling into this line that the president is the chosen one.
I'm so glad at moments like this that I'm not a Christian, so this whole theology is just completely alien to me, and you can just imagine what kind of politics have been justified this way because someone happened to reach and gain the reins of power, and some of those people among the very worst. But look, the question you're asking is that we had a Republican Party that in the 1990s was busy denouncing Bill Clinton and his scandals in the language of the death of outrage, and invoking Christianity, or at least invoking moral virtues, as a way of scolding their political opponents. And it just is interesting to observe the speed with which the people who used to speak about the necessity of outrage and moral standards and moral character in government have suddenly discovered a new theology which justifies not only Donald Trump, but could virtually justify anyone in office.
Eddie, Franklin Graham, the son of Billy Graham, said last week that the impeachment fight is a spiritual battle.
Yeah, to hear Franklin Graham or Paula White is to, in some ways, hear the voices of a particular segment of white Christianity that I think has flatlined, that is in effect dead. When we look at its growth, it's not there. It's not growing in terms of its demographics. You look at the arguments within Liberty University itself. We see these folk desperately clinging to Donald Trump because I think the writing is on the wall for a certain understanding.
You mean young evangelicals are saying, I'm not buying into this.
We saw those debates at Liberty itself, right? And so part of what we have to kind of wrap our minds around, Stephanie, is this. White Christianity has always been, in some ways, idolatrous. The adjective over-determining the noun. It has reconciled itself, the church standing right next to the slave auction block. Preachers, ministers leading mobs to destroy communities in Wilmington and Tulsa. There's a way in which people have reconciled the gospel. You're not in this conversation. The gospel, reconciled the gospel with evil, to justify their practices with the gospel. What we're seeing from the mouths of folks like Franklin Graham and Paula White and others is the use of the gospel to justify their wanton and craven desire to walk the corridors of power. And what we need in response are progressive Christians, people in that tradition, to describe them for what they are, hypocrites.
Whew. Evan?
Yeah, look, I'll just say that I am a Christian, and I'm proud to be a Christian and grateful to be a Christian. But one thing that it's important to understand for all those who support Trump, either fully or somewhat, that, you know, in Christianity, a key tenet of that is that we all have free will, that we are empowered to make choices for ourselves and to choose between good and evil, and we bear responsibility for those choices. And to suggest that we no longer have that free will and that we no longer have responsibility is deeply immoral and is not Christian. And I think it's important, and I hope that those who are supporting Trump will reconsider that, because I think it is both harmful to the Republican Party, it's harmful to Christianity, and frankly, it's harmful to the souls of those who follow that perversion.
So last night there was a judge who said we need to recognize the Constitution and the three equal branches of government because presidents calling the president the chosen one, when last time I checked, Christians didn't worship false idols. Bret, last word to you. What is going on here?
Well, this is, you make the essential point. Christian or not, I'm Jewish, but we live in a country that's governed by the rule of law, a constitution that does not mention Christianity, a place where whatever you choose to worship or not choose to worship, we are held to certain legal and evidentiary standards, and that's what needs to govern here against a president. Leaving aside his morality, the question is what he has done to violate his oath of office, and in my view, he's violated it.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.